Oh dear, that was not supposed to happen. So much for that then, because it looks like George Russell and the drivers got way more than they bargained for. Since the FIA has responded to the letter from the GPDA in a manner which might actually wind up seeing the first mass driver walkout in this century. I wouldn't be surprised. Oh, that was a sneaky move, Mr. Sulayem. Whilst social media and F1 news outlets, you know, the people that he and the FIA loathe entirely, I've taken a look at that letter that George Russell and the recently formed GPDA wrote up and went, you want clearer penalties? I'll give you clearer penalties! To the point where basically that letter might have netted all of the drivers at least a €40,000 fine, be forced to make a public apology, and to withdraw the letter. I mean, that's in theory, according to Article 12.2.1.0 of the International Sporting Code of the FIA Appendix B. And all 20 racers follow the Grand Prix Drivers Association Instagram account that infers that they are all in solidarity. And most importantly, these penalties, in theory, are backdated by 2 years, or could sit around for 2 years. So if the FIA decided to penalise everybody for that letter, they in theory could. Any moment, and they would gain about €500,000 worth of fines from it. Terribly sorry to interrupt you, but in the middle of editing this video, I found out it's gotten even more complicated, because according to Andrew Benson from BBC Sport, this supposedly might have been a snap decision from Mohammed bin Sulayem himself, because apparently a lot of the people within the FIA, according to sources, are not in agreement with this, so it might just be at the behest of the president himself that there was a snap digital online only vote with barely any consultation with stakeholders within the FIA. So this was just done probably on impulse. And the GPDA, well, they have got nothing to say on this for the time being, but expect a response soon. So I just thought I'd let you know. So pretty impulsive here. So I'm just going to get back to editing and yeah, let's just continue with the video because I've still got plenty of things to talk about, okay? And the really sneaky part of this appendix, we're talking about the paper kind, not the stuff what was pulled out of Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon in it, were dropped on the same day as Lewis Hamilton's first ever laps around Fiorano in a Ferrari Formula 1 car. And then we saw him in red overalls for the first time. And then we saw his base helmet design for 2025. And then him waving to the crowd with his proud mum in tow. And then you got Charles Leclerc addressing the fans in adoration, both of those drivers as happy as, well, me, Larry. It attracted the attention of the world, so the FIA just went like, and thinking people wouldn't notice.
Nice try.
And upon reflection, most of this Appendix B seems in keeping with what the GPDA were asking for in regards to how penalties were administered and how they were governed in not only Formula 1, but for every single level of motorsport that the FIA governs. So yeah, if you took a look at this at face value, you might be thinking, well, okay, isn't this what the GPDA wanted? Just clear instructions, something that's structured and consistent, because that was one of the issues, that they were complaining about the inconsistency of penalties and fines, like Max Verstappen gets community service for cussing, Charles Leclerc does the same thing but only gets €10,000 and he immediately apologises or something? Yeah, that the FIA have gone a little bit too far, in fact way too far. There are some good parts though, I will give them credit where it is due, but it's mostly criticism. Because in regards to the lower series and Formula 1, there is a sliding scale, means that the lower series don't get fined as much as F1 teams, because they obviously have more money, more capital, whereas lower series and teams obviously don't. There is a little bit more fairness in that regard. It's now going from level 1 being your bog standard international series, level 3 being FIA World Championships like F2, F3, Formula E, etc., and level 4 is the FIA Formula 1 World Championship. So F1 drivers around the scale would get fined 4 times as much than those from lower classes. Alright, that seems fairer, because at least it doesn't punish those in lower series with lower budgets the same way as Formula 1 teams. Like I said, there's a huge difference in terms of expenditure and budget and stuff like that. In a way, George Russell and the GPDA did get what they want. There is something a bit clearer and a little bit fairer. And then there's the stuff regarding the vagueness of misconduct. What constitutes a penalty in regards to misconduct? Well, this is what the FIA says and defines as misconduct, because the thing on the document is just any misconduct. So here is their definition for clarity. The general use of language, written or verbal, gesture and or sign that is offensive, insulting, coarse, rude or abusive, and might reasonably be expected or be perceived to be coarse or rude, to cause offense, humiliation or be inappropriate, assaulting, elbowing, kicking, punching, hitting, etc., and incitement to do any of the above. So essentially, they are punishing the act of doing it, the talk of the act of doing it, or even the thinking of the acting of doing it in the same manner. So, just keep your thoughts to yourself, basically, and you might be fine. I mean, maybe. Who knows? The FIA might plant chips inside the drivers. But okay, objectively, it is a little clearer. But that's where credit due the FIA ends, because the other stuff seems to be more draconian and ruthless than what Russell and his crew were wanting, and could ultimately mean that the organisation couldn't make this public statement again without repercussions. Again, in theory. Because the rest of the letter called for greater transparency, the drivers most likely emboldened by Formula One's much greater presence on the global stage, to speak out on matters which might cause the sport itself to be seen as insidious, corrupt, secretive, or irrational. But then again, has what the FIA been doing in recent years been any surprise to anybody who follows sport? I mean, FIFA anybody? I mean, okay, I'm not a football guy, although as a child I was a junior gunner. I could imagine that there are similar instances here that FIFA, the English FA, there have probably been moments that could be easily considered as corruption and all this stuff and thinking ideas above their station, right? In the comments? Is this similar? Is this a surprise? But the way I see it, Mohammed bin Sulayem and the FIA have taken a look at this letter, and they seem to have interpreted it in perhaps a darker and completely misjudged way that probably the GPDA or us expected. Because when you look at this, even though there is a clear structure of fines, the letter itself said that financial fines were not ideal, that they actually cast a negative image on the sport. So, okay, there is a table, there is a chart, but the act of fines now being the first line of defence from the FIA and the stewards to be able to use at their whim, it's going against what the letter said, so yeah, cross for that. But hey, to be fair, it's not nearly as bad as the fine that McLaren got for Spygate, $100 million, and that Max Mosley was jokingly saying to anyone who would listen, oh, $5 million of that was just for the actual incident itself. The other $95 million was basically because I don't like Ron Dennis and I think he's a see you next Tuesday. That's how immature it got back in the day. We're not at that level yet, although we might get close. Instead of using other measures which either reduce the presence of fines, it's gone the other way. The chart is full of them. And let's not forget that sliding scale and that third strike principle. Well, then you might be arguing, well, wait a minute, the fines are only one part of this. The FIA can use other things to hurl at a driver or a team or a person. But the other stuff they can throw at them is almost even worse and could even compromise the integrity or excitement of an F1 World Championship battle. For example, any personal or political statement against FIA principles could, by the third strike, result in a €120,000 fine, a 1-month suspension, I think from competition, and championship points being docked. And note the asterisk, a 2-year review window, which means that in theory, once somebody has done something, it might slip under the radar for the time being, thinking that one might have gotten away with it. But the FIA could maybe take a look at it if there's a repeat incident or it's been brought to light by Mr. Sulayem, that it could be brought to task. So anything that the drivers have done in the last 2 years could be drudged back up again and hurled against them at a Grand Prix should the stewards deem it necessary. That's in theory. The stewards don't have to do this, but who knows? Sorry, I didn't mean to get a little bit long-winded about this, but this is a serious cause for concern because this could in theory affect all 20 drivers if that letter is something that Mr. Sulayem wants to seek revenge on. Because whilst it's incredibly bold for all 20 drivers to band together and speak out against the sudden and bizarre imposition of fines and penalties, which were not expected, making this letter and just throwing it out there might have been the wrong thing to do in the long run. But I can understand why they did it, because Formula One has never been more popular than it is today. Formula One is a cultural phenomena. It's far more relevant and far more aware amongst the general public than it has ever been before, as far as I can tell. I've been following the sport for over 25 years, and for the longest time, it's been a niche thing. I could not find anybody who talked about Formula One except a couple of people at school. Now, more often than not, I do see the occasional team t-shirt, a cap, or people talking about it. In fact, I saw a car the other day with Williams Racing decals on them. Either it's an official car from Williams, I don't know why they are here in South London, because it's Oxfordshire they're based in, but either way, that kind of stuff, the small things, that's how much it's permeated culture. And all of this stuff is just going to drive people away for the fact that it's just going against the drivers and what they're there to do and making use of their platform, which is perfectly reasonable and stuff that people with influence do all the time. And one simple thing, it's far more likely for people to be able to know all 20 drivers on the grid today than it would have been, say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, certainly. Note the multiple cases of both Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton initiating initiatives that were indeed politically and environmentally motivated. In the case of Vettel, he saw the writing on the wall most likely, using his voice outside of F1, choosing to retire in Mr. Sulayem's first year of office. By the way, for those curious about what Sebastian's like in terms of his activism, go and watch the BBC Question Time episode if you can, where he does feature. He is very stark in his choice of wear, but the words that he says are very powerful, and he is incredibly humble as well. People accuse him of being hypocritical. He's talking about climate change, and yet he drives Formula 1 cars, and he's like, yeah, I know, but I try and make good where I can. He's really, really humble in that. He's far different to what he was in the Red Bull days. And seriously, he really should consider running for the replacement of Stefano Domenicali. Him being the king of F1, oh, he'd be great. Lewis, though, he remained in F1, and he still makes use of his unopposed power and influence to call out injustices and promote causes that matter anyway. Say what you will about the guy, but he is effective in those regards. So much so, in fact, that Ferrari has bent over backwards to accommodate him and his initiatives in multiple respects. However, this kind of confidence and vocality and talking about stuff that isn't about Formula 1 is something that quite clearly the FIA president doesn't take kindly to. Because we all remember what he did in December. He did respond to the GPDA letter himself, basically saying, yeah, it's none of your business what we do. And we all thought that was the end of that. That he decided to hurl his toys out of the pram, make a comment, and then that was that. And then George Russell will be going in the background, blimey, I can't believe you just ignored our instructions. This is not good, Toto. What do we do now? I'm sorry, George. I can't really focus on that. I'm busy putting Kimi in the car. And in the midst of all that, Mr. Sulayem was just going, hey guys, come on. I'm a driver, just like you. I can relate. Let's just go racing and be done with all of this nonsense, yeah? Racing, yeah, I was a driver, just like you. I get you. Okay, Mr. Sulayem, I understand. I'll just take this image here and I'll just put it over there somewhere. And, oh no, I dropped it. Oh, I've dropped it in the pinned comment. Yeah. So judging from my best guess, seemingly, according to Mr. Sulayem, the best way to clap back to this letter in a manner which would make it hard for the drivers to clap back equally or harder is to throw this gem in as the first guideline. Article 12.2.1.f, where it basically means anything said, done, or written that harms the FIA, its members, or the values of motorsport will receive these penalties which run up to points lost from a driver or team total. Or if you really want to oversimplify it, anybody from the FIA or any cultural figure within the governing body could just go, stewards, X or Y is picking on me! And then, naughty boy, naughty! That's basically what it is. And considering the amount of time Max Verstappen chooses to actually be quite outspoken and straightforward, it's just the FIA just going, hey, Max, that's a nice championship campaign you got going there. It'd be awfully sad if you were to lose some of them. Couple that with the penalties issued for speaking out on personal causes that the FIA deems inappropriate or not in line with them means you could get fined or penalised for those actions as well, and then get penalised again for criticising the original penalty. So ideally, the FIA wants the drivers to keep their mouths shut, just go racing, and oh yeah, while you're at it, keep your discourse PG, okay? Yeah, sure, that's going to be really easy after spending 2 or 3 hours with your adrenaline levels completely maxed out, and then you got to try and find some way to purge them. Yeah, I know, many people take what people say after they just got out of the car seriously, but that is something to consider. You know, people are on edge at that time. So what we've essentially got is a situation where the FIA ultimately did respond to the letter George Russell et al. Issued to the public domain, despite the initial dismissal from the FIA president. But it's proven to be mostly draconian in response, in a manner which would affect drivers the most if they became repeat offenders. In my honest opinion, this is not something I think is going to go down well, and I know that some people might be saying, well, what about that thing that the FIA changed from things and protests will not be accepted to they would be inadmissible. Well, I did take a look at that as well, but ultimately I think that was just a change from making it just, instead of standard discourse, it's now a bit more formal in legalese or something like that. Will not be accepted and inadmissible, they essentially mean the same thing. One is just more legal and formal and litigious than the other one. But regardless, this kind of interference with Appendix B, it could compromise the integrity of a championship, and maybe expedite drivers in thinking of reconsidering their options, whether or not Formula 1 or any FIA-related series is right for them. This is a very weird place we are in right now. The FIA has shown their hand, and it's now up to the stewards whether they choose to adhere themselves to the guidelines or not. Now, do keep in mind, as we have found out in recent months, the stewards are not hired by the FIA as full-time employees. It's more of an informal, voluntary, self-employed basis. You're basically called upon when you're needed. And then, of course, there's a lead guy who used to be Tim Mayer, the son of Teddy Mayer, the long-running team principal of McLaren after Bruce McLaren sadly passed away. Well, he suddenly disappeared after 15 years plus of service. But I think no matter what the stewards do, it's going to be a catch-22 situation. Because they would either receive fierce criticism from the drivers and their supporters for imposing these charges and penalties if they did, or if they didn't, they could potentially never be asked back to work for the FIA as a steward again, should they not do what the FIA instructs them to do. And sure, they don't get paid a formal salary, but there are plenty of perks surely that come with the job. So essentially, the drivers have been told to flip around and find out if they choose to continue to act the way they are right now. But I could imagine that even though this is a very, very strict and harsh way of responding to that GPDA letter, I wouldn't be surprised at all if George Russell and company come back with something even stronger. The talk potentially of a mass driver walkout. It has happened in the past with drivers in the FIA, but they haven't really gone as far as people would like them to. They have delayed races, but it's really not gone any further than that. Could the teams get behind them? Could Liberty Media and Formula 1 management get behind them and then threaten yet another breakaway? This time I think could easily be quite plausible. I just don't understand what the FIA are doing right now because, yeah, I personally think that the FIA want a piece of that F1 pie about how successful it is, and they want to make themselves relevant and control that powerful beast with these rules, but it's gonna fail. It's gonna fail badly. Can you imagine that if an errant comment made in the heat of a moment from a driver could result in their championship bid being decided over something not on the track but something said? A curse word, immortalised for turning a championship around either through a driver being suspended for multiple races or points being removed. So a person could be taken out of championship contention, and the person that would then stand to gain from this, their victory and title would become a hollow victory. People would then just mock them or just lessen and undermine their achievement by saying, oh, they only got it just because X or Y swore that one time in a press conference. That's how bad it could get, and that would easily cheapen even people who would stand to benefit from this if they were squeaky clean. I can imagine that if these strict guidelines are actually enforced and the drivers who are quite notable and big in the sport choose to just continue about their days anyway, that the likes of maybe Hamilton, Verstappen, or even Alonso actually might just get together and go, okay, fine, we're off, bye, and they choose to go and do something else. Maybe Fernando decides to go back to IndyCar and get that Triple Crown again, maybe. So then that would definitely drag in Formula 1 management and Liberty Media into the situation, as well as Ferrari, since for the longest time, the FIA were known mockingly as Ferrari International Assistants. They came to Ferrari's aid all the time. And maybe considering the might of FOM and Ferrari, could Lewis Hamilton utilise these two titans to respond in a really effective manner alongside Max Verstappen and his straightforwardness? Maybe. It's something to consider for the future. But honestly, I would rather it not come to this. I would rather, much like Max Verstappen, have all of this settled on the racetrack and championships won and lost in the heat of competitive battling. It's clear that Mr. Sulayem is really sore about his reputation being dragged through the mud, mostly through his own actions over the last couple of years. In fact, he got so sore, he even chose to throw what many drivers have used over the last couple of months, the British bias card. Nah, sorry mate, that ain't it. I think people from most territories around the world would agree with myself, a British person, that no, what you're doing is wrong. The fact that all these fines are being implemented whilst the FIA has removed its own accountability arm regarding the accumulation of fines and where they go, right before the next FIA presidential bid start up? Yeah, no. you're not fooling anybody.
But you know what? I think other motorsporting series might stand to gain from this. Any single motor racing series out there that isn't governed by the FIA might actually look at this and go, ooh, lovely.
This might be a golden opportunity for IndyCar to maybe gain some big names and coverage from the added attention and fans flocking to it out of anger, renouncing Formula One. So much for their push into America then. Maybe that's why Will Buxton decided to sign up for Fox and actually cover IndyCar, because, you know, he can maybe be a bit more outspoken because of these rules. Maybe he knew something ahead of time. Maybe NASCAR could get a shot in the arm as well, if Daniel Ricciardo chooses to have a whirl in the series. IMSA might gain from this as well, and they've been doing really well in gaining public perception and kudos by making multiple video clips free to use for content creators in a Dropbox folder. Talk about casual class. And even motorbikes could gain from this, because MotoGP, even though it might come under the ownership of Liberty Media if they get their way in the European courts, is governed by the FIM, you know, the Motorbikes International Federation. It's not the FIA. It's not under Mr. Sulayem's jurisdiction. So maybe if Lewis Hamilton leaves because of all this going down, he might decide to take up all of those rumours about him potentially buying out a team like Gresini or the really financially troubled KTM. He could easily be encouraged to do that, to keep his hand in motorsport, but yet not give any time or day to the FIA. But what we've got here ultimately is a classic case of overreach. Rules to fix rules that might need even more rules to fix them later. Whether George Russell and the GPDA foresaw this backfiring or not, it's plain to see that the FIA's response is less about clarity and more about control. And that's really dangerous, considering that Formula One is a sport that thrives getting the right balance of chaos and order in line. Because from what we've seen from the likes of Alonso, Vettel, Hamilton, and some of the other members of the grid, is that they like to talk about stuff and they don't go down quietly. This war of words might have just begun and the FIA has fired the first shot.
So let's just hope Formula One continues to be magical on track and that we don't end up with a battle between the people who own the commercial arm and the ones that govern it, because we actually managed to sustain peace between these two bits. I think it might break out again in a bitter battle. Seriously.
And speaking of something magical, Haas has been quietly building something very exciting. Could they finally become the giant killers of the midfield in 2025? To find out more why I think Haas could be the breakout team of 2025, watch this video next to find out more. That is, until the FIA takes a look at them and finds them or something, I don't know.